The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our program today, Faith Matters, here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie, and also Reverend Carl Zorowski, and also Bishop Doc Loomis. And good day, gentlemen. With that fanfare,
Good day, Ben.
we'll start. Our first article today comes from the stream.com. It says, can we please stop with this Nazi Hitler name-calling stuff? It's a piece written by Michael Brown. It says Adolf Hitler and the Nazis committed some of the most horrific acts known to the human race, systematically murdering millions of Jews, including 1.5 million Jewish children and babies, along with other ethnic and social minorities, not to mention sparking a war that killed many millions of others. In light of the depths of their evil, we had better be very careful before we label others Nazis or call our opponents Hitler. And then he goes on to kind of quantify that with all the different times that people have been called that, but most especially lately when you said that Donald Trump is like Hitler, including Frank Navarro, a Holocaust scholar who's now a high school teacher, stated that there are remarkable parallels between Hitler and Donald Trump. And other people as well who have just said that you see, we told you Trump was a Nazi. So this is disturbing, though, when we see this kind of disrespect paid, and that name is bandied about. I often wonder, though, guys, just how much this is from people who have no sense of history, who just simply have this as a bad guy, so let's call him a bad guy. Any thoughts on that? Now I can call on somebody, or you can volunteer.
I guess you'll have to.
Right.
I'm gonna. You know, I don't normally do this, but I'm gonna.
No, you almost never jump in. No.
Well, you know, I couldn't help but reflect a little bit on how this. I mean, there's a syndrome about this. It actually has a name that I can't remember right now. I'm searching my database right now. I need a wet drive upgrade. But anyway, that this is very common. Always has been since Hitler. Mm-hmm. And Hitler probably used somebody else's name, to do the same thing. And it's that thing where you build a caricature, a stereotype. And the straw man argument, it's a fallacy of logic. And then you condemn the straw man. And that's really what they're doing. And so, more power to them. It's weak, and it's usually the last in a series when they can no longer defend their position. And so they go to the ad hominem attack, the personal attack. You don't attack the message. You don't talk about the message that they're bringing. You talk about them personally. And that's how this goes. When you're losing an argument, when your opponent is losing his argument, Hitler is going to pop up sooner or later.
Well, I read this article. And I've been watching the news the last few weeks, and, you hear all of this name-calling. And it makes me want to ask this question. Are we all in the third grade? Is that where we are now? We as the adults in this country, we worry about what are the youth of our nation going to grow up to be like. We need to be good examples for them. I think that the way, it seems now like if you're an adult and somebody doesn't agree with your position and you can't convince them to agree with your position, you resort to name calling. Is that what we're teaching our kids to do?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're very correct on that, but this also extends to the disrespect we're seeing. I mean, he won the election, but the disrespect that is coming out about the president-elect and also the people associated with him, and people around him now. Steve Bannon is one who's going to be an advisor. He names him as chief of staff. That's not correct. Rice Previs is chief of staff, but it's going to be an advisor and a former Breitbart
chief
guy.
of strategy.
Yeah, strategy, something like that.
Yeah.
But they've been calling him and then associating that with other so-called alt-right movements.
Yeah.
And then the placards that say "Not my president," the others that call him any number of names. Doc, seems to be fed by our media as well as, it's a one feeding upon the other.
Well, we're in the middle of a vicious cycle right now. We've got this politically correct world and a politically correct left who's trying to convince the rest of us that unless we're completely inclusive, unless we're completely open to every possible thought, then we get branded a name. And that's just what they've done to everybody. They haven't done it just to Trump. They've done it to Pence. They've done it to pretty much every conservative leading candidate or juror that's been there. The thing about this and the Hitler reference, I think, is because of that NPI conference that was held, what was it, last week?
Right.
which is clearly a far ragged. I mean, it's so far right, it's almost kissing the left hand's, And they had a conference where people were Zeke Heiling and putting their hands in the air, and so somebody said, "Boy, that looks like Hitler. I think we'll call him Hitler." And it's sad to me because I like what Carl said, but it's sad to me because my children went to school. I mean, they're in their 30s now, but they know who Hitler was,
Right.
and they look at this stuff. But I mean, a 20-year-old, we don't study. Do you know we don't study this stuff in school anymore?
Right.
What do we get? Three days on World War II? And really, we start with what?
We don't study wars we won anymore. We only study wars we lost. That's the way it is in the schools now.
Oh, study wars we lost?
Yeah.
Did we lose World War II?
No, we didn't.
No, okay. Well,
that's why we don't study it. What we study is Vietnam. What they're teaching them now in the schools is Vietnam. It's fascinating, isn't it? I'm hijacking your point. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I had a very profound point I wanted to make, and now I completely forgot what it was. But I have one. You want me to make? But all I want to say is this is the kind of thing that happens. History. The further we get away from a person, it's like Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan was really like 5'10". Okay, and he had a dog. He didn't even have an ox, right? And John Henry.
And he wasn't blue.
No.
What?
And John Henry could barely swing a hammer. I mean, I think he actually cooked for the railroad. But the further we get away from people, you see what happens. So
this caricature is
this whole stereotypical thing, this very Mel Brooks form of Hitler, this character, if you will. And now we're just going to label that and oh yeah, I remember Hitler from school. He was bad. Donald Trump must be really bad. Now there is I defy this guy to give me one real parallel in life, existence, military service, art, finance, anything where Donald Trump parallels Hitler.
Even in populism, even if you're trying to make it that as being the parallel, it's very difficult.
Well, Michael Brown, the author of this article, really this article is exposing this. It's not going along with it. And Michael Brown has some creds to speak about this because he's a Jew who is a Christian as well. He's a completed Jew or a Messianic Jew. And so he has, when you start calling people Hitler and comparing the Republican Party to Nazism, then he's going to step up.
The hairs on the back of his neck.
Exactly. And the article's a brilliant article, frankly. He really does expose this.
But what does it say?
Lack of historical context, this post-truth.
Well, it's demeaning to history. It's demeaning to what happened to the Jews when we throw these kinds of names around.
Precisely.
Right.
Yeah, I grew up across the street from a wonderful woman who was a Holocaust survivor, and she had seen her entire family put to death. and she has since passed on. Were she alive today, do I think that she would have supported a Republican in any election? No, that wasn't who she was. But do I think that she would stand for the name calling and the references to Hitler now? No, she was a tiny little woman, but she was full of fire, and I could see her going, like in that debate years ago. Sir, I knew Hitler, and you are no Hitler.
Yeah, this is the thing is about the name calling is that it's morally vacuous and just destroys any moral underpinning that any argument would have. As you said, when you bring that up, it's sort of over. It's sort of
right. Right. You go back to the third graders who get into an argument, and when it gets to the name calling, there's no more discussion at that point. All the discussion ends. There is no resolution at that point.
It's the Monty Python argument clinic, if you remember that one. A simple gainsaying a fact.
Right.
And it becomes something you can't win. As we know, we've talked about evangelism is not successful by argument. We don't argue our way into witnessing for someone, into someone changing their belief.
Well, Ben, I have a question for you. This must be so disturbing to see in the field of journalism. You're a journalist, I
can tell you a lot of stories about that, but I've watched this decline for a long time, and I feel that there's very few out there who are very fair in their journalistic approach any longer. It is sad.
It's tragic, really, for a nation.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis, Reverend Carl Zarowski, and Reverend Robert Cornegie. And we're talking on our next article about what has certainly been big news in the church this past week. And pulling from the Reuters article, it's been all over other press as well, though. Pope extends power to forgive abortion to all Roman Catholic priests. And this article in particular is by Philip Pulella or Putella. I can't see it. It's too small print. But it says Pope Francis on Monday extended indefinitely to all Roman Catholic priests the power to forgive abortion, a right previously reserved for bishops or special confessors in most parts of the world. Francis has made a more inclusive and forgiving Roman Catholic Church a characteristic of his papacy. Made the announcement in a document known as an apostolic letter after Sunday's close of the Church's Holy Year of Mercy. He said he wanted to restate as firmly as I can that abortion is a grave sin since it puts an end to an innocent life, but there is no sin that God's mercy cannot reach and wipe away when it finds a repentant heart seeking to be reconciled with God. I think we may need some terminology corrections here, or just some understanding. Doc, is it the idea of, and of course, I turn to you, Doc.
Our Italian.
The old Catholic, it's called.
That's right.
The old Catholic.
That's right. You drag him out.
But is there something we need to understand the difference between absolution and offering forgiveness? Is there something to understand here that?
No, it's the same thing.
It isn't.
The absolution is simply the spoken word. I mean, God provides absolution, unless you're a Catholic, in which case the priest and or the bishop provide absolution. But we would all acknowledge that the forgiveness, we're simply speaking the words that need to be spoken. Right. To provide the sacrament that God has ordained, which is your forgiveness, right? So that's all absolution is. Each one of us, in our Anglican churches, we do the same thing. We speak we absolve, we speak an absolution over the folks.
Okay. And so this article, this declaration, again, extending what was offered during the Holy Year of Mercy. Any surprise, Robert? Surprise about this, or is it? How do you think this is being received by the church?
Well, I think by the church,
or by Christians, by
anybody. to me, they're probably thinking, oh, I didn't know that abortion was the unpardonable sin. I mean, that's kind of the way it reads, that headline and all of that, is that, that there's this thing. And which, that's really a burden that you're laying on a whole lot of people, that you can't be for, you got to jump through some special hoops to be able to be for. I mean, it's murder is kind of like murder. And can you be forgiven of murder? Yes, you can be forgiven of murder, not because the church decides to, but because God said the only thing you're not going to be forgiven for is basically not asking for forgiveness. I mean, that's kind of the way that works. And so, yeah, I think that, again, and I mentioned it earlier, this is another one of those headlines in search of a click on the internet. But I'm glad he did it. I'm glad he explained it, that they actually have a mechanism for this, because there are, in the pregnancy ministry, that's one of our major areas of ministry, is for post-abortion forgiveness.
Yeah, this isn't really an issue of doctrine here.
No.
This is an issue of accessibility.
Exactly.
And by providing a greater access to the sacrament of penance and the forgiveness that comes with it, he's sending a message he's trying to include more of the people who need God's mercy. So I say bravo. But is it news? No, because he did this. This has been something that's been going on for the last year, and he's just extending this out beyond the year of mercy. But it has always been forgivable. It's an excommunicatable and grave sin.
It is.
But it's forgivable.
Yeah.
I'm not aware that the Vatican ever said that God cannot forgive someone for what they've done. If that's a part of Catholic doctrine,
sin.
I'm unaware of it.
Well, my question, because I'm not a Roman Catholic, never have been. So my question in reading this article is, are there different classifications of sin? That some sins are worse than others? Because when I read this, I go, oh, well, all right, stealing a pencil from work. Well, that's stealing, that's a sin. I can get that forgiven here in my local church. But abortion, I've got to go find a bishop. I mean, I'm asking because I don't understand. Are there different levels of the gravity of a sin?
Are you saying to a Catholic person?
To a Catholic
Yes.
person,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, when we were raised up, we knew that there was a difference between venial sins and mortal sins, and there were classifications of sin. And back at the time of the Reformation, the depth of sin was how we measured what the penance was, what the payment for the sin was that we had to make, and that's where eventually indulgences came, and then we all became Anglicans. But are there levels of sin? God doesn't see levels of sin, does he?
No.
Because Jesus himself talks about adultery and just then the thought of adultery being as bad as the actual act. So, no, I don't think they really exist like that. But I will say this, in defense of the Catholic position on this, any one of us, we are all pastor churches, any one of us, if somebody came into us and walked into our office and said, I stole a pencil, we would say, okay, well, return the pencil and don't do it again, and let's ask God to forgive you. But if somebody walked into the office and said, I'm having an affair with my neighbor's wife, we would treat it differently. It would get a higher level of our response, our time, our prayer, and our commitment, and we'd probably go into a deeper penitential relationship with the person. And so I think because abortion is such a deeply painful thing for so many women, that I think what the position has always been is it needs to go to a higher level. It needs to go to somebody who really can minister at the depth of that pain and suffering, which was always the bishop in the Catholic Church, or somebody specially trained, a special emissary,
confessor.
a special confessor who is specially trained to deal with the enormity of the situation.
Since what we do on this program often is take a look at how media responds to various matters of faith and things, I think, Carl, maybe to your point, or your question, is that a lot of people will look at this that are not Catholic. A lot of us, Protestants or others, or just people searching, will look at it and say, oh, okay, well, so we're just going to offer forgiveness for that and let's move on. And nothing. The repentant part is sort of downplayed in the media. and often kind of using words that sound like repenting but not exactly. So it sort of makes it confusing, I think, for a lot of people.
If I read this headline and I didn't get very far into the article, my thought might be, oh, okay, it's okay to have an abortion because I can get forgiveness now.
Right.
And, that's certainly not the case. And with the, discussion about the different levels of sin, I fully understand and fully believe that a sin is a sin. It's either black or white. There's no gray area when it comes to sin. But I can see where what would be required to turn from that sin can be a lot more involved with some sins than others. Our human attempts, as feeble as they are, to make things right, following what we've done to harm somebody else, there can be a whole lot more involved in, say, a murder than returning the pencil to the office.
Repentance and reconciliation becomes more difficult. And
correct. But then I also want to make sure that the folks listening understand. I believe that forgiveness only comes through God's mercy and grace, not through anything that I do. Now, I can do things to try to... Correct. I can do things to help smooth things out, help people to move forward, help myself to move forward after some sin. But the forgiveness is only through grace and mercy. And that's what I like about this article, because that's what I see here, is that, the Pope and the Catholic Church is saying, yes, even if you have committed this sin that we have called a very grave sin, God's mercy is available to you. But
you're reading it also through a pastor's eyes, and so it's going to be the to your point, Robert, the clickbait idea for the great unwashed is going to maybe have a different reaction to that.
Yeah, and I think the point is well taken, Carl. That it forgiveness begins in the vertical relationship with God. Mm-hmm. It has to start there. But what happens too often is we don't do that. We don't go to God and get that peace and that grace and that mercy from Him, and we start working on the consequences of these kind of things, or we stuff it and hide it. Mm-hmm. And so what to go and have a priest go through the process of absolving and forgiveness, that God forgives and all of that. You're good with the church, but you still got to work on you.
Yeah. But this part,
that's the huge part.
He definitely wants to return people to the body of Christ, the church. That's his goal here, mm-hmm. both in the accessibility and the change in church law. Because prior to this time, excommunication was the result of procuring or providing an abortion.
Right.
And that's an irrevocable. You're excommunicated. That's it. And I think the fact that he's saying we actually want people to come back to the church now, and we can find a method by which we can actually make that, we can absolve, which is the ecclesiastical pronouncement of God's forgiveness, that we as a church are willing to do that, is his way of saying, please come back to the body of Christ.
More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie, Reverend Carl Zorowski, and Bishop Doc Loomis, as we talk about some other articles today. This one is coming on fresh concerns about Christians in the Middle East. A couple of articles, one from CNN, says, in biblical lands of Iraq, Christianity in peril after ISIS, and another one from the, from the stream says 1 million Syrian Christians can thank Hindu Democrat Representative Tulsi Gabbard, and we'll start there. This article by Jason Jones and John Zmirak says that this week Donald Trump surprised the world and frightened entrenched interests in the GOP, ranging from hair-trigger interventionists to military contractors, by meeting with Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. You might not have heard of her, but this Hawaii Democrat has been one of the loudest voices in Congress speaking for the protection of Middle Eastern Christians and other religious minorities. Here's part of Representative Gabbard's statement. President-elect Trump asked me to meet with him about our current policies regarding Syria, our fight against terrorist groups like al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, as well as other foreign policy challenges we face. I felt it important to take the opportunity to meet with the president-elect now before the drumbeats of war that neocons have been beating drag us into an escalation of war to overthrow the Syrian government, a war which has already cost hundreds of thousands of lives and forced millions of refugees to flee their homes in search of safety for themselves and their families. The Hill reported Gabbard told Trump she opposes a no-fly or safe zone, calling it disastrous for the Syrian people and the U.S. I think, Robert, you said you've seen a number of things on Facebook about this, but I really haven't seen a lot in the old guard media.
No,
I haven't seen anything that mentioned
Well, this is not the model that they want to present. This doesn't fit the meme this is an alt-right Republican administration when he's actually meeting with some Democrats. So she doesn't fit the narrative. But it's exciting to see that he is bringing her in, quite frankly, because it's true. This current administration that we have has basically been absent in this protecting of minority rights in the middle of this conflict over there. And she has been a stalwart on this. So, good on her. Thank you. And hopefully this will influence.
I think it's been very difficult for Americans and American Christians to wrap our heads around what's going on in terms of understanding the depth and breadth of the genocide that's taking place among Christians in this part of the world, and no matter what side it's coming from. From Iraq, the CNN report talks about it. Gives a personal view of this and talks about a family that feels hopeless of this. Doc, are you hearing anything from some of your friends I know that are in this area? Are you hearing anything about how whether Christians are finding a way to survive? Or what is the story here?
Well, they've been, since 2013, really, they've been leaving it, like 100,000 a month. When you get into areas like northern Iraq, where Christianity came in the first century with the apostles Thomas and Thaddeus, I think, that grew to a huge faith in the Middle East, particularly in that Nineveh, the plains of Nineveh area. And those people have mostly all left. They've all gone to Kurdistan and Kurd-controlled areas right now. But again, this is one of those things where we have to look at history and not. I want to be alarmed that that there's a genocide going on, but this is a repeatable genocide. This is a genocide that's been happening since forever. With the rise of Islam in the 7th century, there was a mass genocide. In the 12th century, there was a mass genocide. The Turks came into the 15th century. There was a mass genocide. There was a mass genocide in the 1930s, in the early 1930s. This is a constant plowing and harvesting, and I don't use those I mean those in the pejorative, that has been going on in this area for a very long time. And people who live in that area know that. They're aware of that. They rise up, they flee, they rise up, they flee, they get killed, they flee. And that's what's really remarkable, is that in places like Mosul and in places in northern Iraq particularly, that I know that some of these cities used to have 150,000 Christians in them, and now they have 30. Wouldn't you like to meet those 30 Christians that stayed?
The remnants are really quite remarkable.
These are and the priests that stay with them. It is really remarkable to me, and it's a real statement about the strength of our Christian faith when we see people that are willing to endure this, when it would be so easy just to go to France and open a bagel shop.
This is very difficult because we want to have policies that are easy to understand. cut and dry. We're on this side or that side. We want people in white hats and black hats, and we want to be able to understand it. But very similar to what happened in the Balkans, where you had 3-way, 4-way fights going on. It's hard to know where America should stand, or should we stand back? I mean, Carl, are you as confused as I am about what policy might look like in this part of the world?
I'm going to quote my good friend Doc. Yes. Yes, I am. Reading these articles, what comes to mind for me, we've been doing a study at our church on the book of Revelation, and we've been studying the persecution that the Christians were suffering under Domitian. And I read these articles, and I think about the message of hope that the writer of Revelation was trying to give to these people. Yes, you're being persecuted. Yes, it looks like evil is winning. But there will be a time when this persecution will come to an end. May not be in your lifetime. You may not live to see it. But it will run its course. Now how does that fit in with our, foreign policy? I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. We had our apologetics conference this weekend, and one of the speakers is, we've talked about him before, Ibrahim. He's a Pakistani and who grew up as a Christian in Pakistan, third-generation Christian. So he's lived under. In fact, he said we live under the theology of persecution.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that we live under the sword of Allah constantly. I mean, we're talking about a fraction of a percentage of the population of Pakistan is Christian, going back 3 generations. That's remarkable. And and he said, the challenge for America and for the West basically is we have this illusion of permanence. And he said, God has called me to come here to America to try to wake you up, because you're living an illusionary life. Because what is normal for the majority of the church is not what we experience.
Correct.
It's a completely different kind of experience. So how does this apply to what Trump is going to do in the Middle East and all of that? How do we do it? We're looking for the quick fix. We're looking for the silver bullet. We're looking for the easy, send in the troops, fix this thing, and let's move on with our life. You're messing up my TV programs with all of these interruptions of breaking news. And that's the thing that God is not going to let us get away with. He's going to call us to reality. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. And the reality is that we have members of our body, the body of Christ, that are in crisis right now. And we're, not really paying attention. So that's a generalization.
But even those who are paying attention don't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, look, there are a lot of Christians who are over there right now from the West, doing everything they can do to try to do something. And I think what you're going to see now, I'm hopeful that we're going to see this current administration has been asleep at the wheel on this. I mean, the optics, they're driven by optics, and the optics of sending troops in to save oppressed minorities is something they're not going to do. I mean, that's stated policy. They're just not going to do it. If they can drone or do something like that, but boots on the ground, it's not going to happen. Now, is that the right thing to do? I don't know. But we have people that are suffering right now in the body of Christ. And, my heart breaks that we're seeing, the impact of what is being lost in that region for the church and the history of the church will be generations working out. So, yeah, it may be strengthening some, but gosh.
But, Christianity has gone all but extinct in that region. I can't even tell you how many times. I listed some of the times, but I would say there have been 3 or 4 times in the history of that region, and yet it always springs back. It's an amazing thing. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything about it. We should just wait because it will spring back. But I'm not sure I completely agree with your analysis of what's going on militarily because, as we know, when we get up in that whole area is old Assyria, right?
Right.
And there is actually quite a bit of momentum, including U.S. forces on the ground in that city by city taking back and protecting, like in Mosul. I think it was one of those places where they said there are like 30 Christians left in the entire city.
Right.
But there is some progress there. But the real question is, and Ben keeps asking it, and I don't think we're answering it, is what should our position be regarding that area? And as a Christian person, I want to say my position should be to go if I can, to pray when I can, and most likely to ask God to protect the Christians that are there, and sometimes, if necessary, to throw my body in front of it. You want to go?
Let's go.
Ben's going. Okay, good. We're going. We won't be on next week.
All right. We'll see you in just a moment here on More Faith Matters. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornigan and Reverend Carl Zarowski, as we talk about one more article here in our final segment. And this one is from RNS Religion News Service. It's headlined, "Study Finds Churches with Conservative Theology Still Growing." And Canadian researchers are revisiting a hotly debated sociological question: why do some churches decline while others succeed? Since the 1960s, the overall membership in mainline Protestant churches has been dropping in both the U.S. and Canada, but some congregations have continued to grow, and a team of researchers believe it now knows why. It's the conservative theological beliefs of their members and clergy, according to researchers from Wilfrid Laurier University and Redeemer University College in Ontario. The riddle of mainline death has been solved, says David M. Haskell of Wilfrid Laurier University. The results of the 5-year research project will be published in December. The project surveyed more than 2,200 churchgoers from Anglican, Presbyterian, Lutheran, and United churches in Ontario. Now, first of all, this research taking place in Canada, where there has been a transformation of the church over decades now into one large conglomeration of churches and some others that still exist independently, but it's a different animal there, isn't it?
Yes, it is, to a degree. I mean, they're extrapolating. They're drawing some conclusions here that are. I mean, I'm sympathetic to their position, but it's tenuous that you can actually build a strong case on this. I think this is a trend that they're seeing, maybe would be a better way to put it, than that it's actually, documented evidence for this.
Mm-hmm. Doc, I know you have friends from that side of the border. I mean, does the research there correspond with what you would think would be happening here in the United States too?
I don't think this has anything to do with theology or conservatism or deeply. I think here's the way it works, Ben. Generally speaking, people who believe the gospel act on the gospel. Mm-hmm. Churches that act on the gospel, that is missional churches, tend to grow. It's kind of the way God set it up. That was his plan in the beginning. When Jesus sent everybody out and said, preach the good news, when he said make disciples, when he said baptize people, that's what he's talking about. When we come to understand what Jesus' command is, and when we begin to accept the Bible as being something that is real, holy, true, and meaningful in our daily lives, then we actually go out and practice it. And the church grows. It's not a surprise.
I think in large part we already talked about clickbait here, and in a way the headline is that. Carl, I think the whole idea of speaking of theology as conservative one is largely wrong-headed. Anyway, maybe speaking of it as orthodox might be one way, but I think when you're trying to label it that way, you end up in trouble.
Yes, you do. And reading this article, I'm reading this. I'm saying, okay, well, I kind of consider myself to be theologically conservative. And as I'm reading this article, I see that I see these percentages of the churches that are growing have 93% of the pastors believe that Jesus was really resurrected. And that means there's 7% that don't.
That's 7%
and
that
in
don't,
the
yeah.
churches that are declining, 43% of the pastors do not believe that Jesus rose from the dead with a real flesh and blood body. Okay. I'm sorry, but as a Christian, that's non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how you can have a Christian church that teaches something other than the resurrection of Jesus.
But the issue you're seeing there, I mean, I love what you're saying, but it's the difference between a church that determines the inerrancy of Scripture is where we're going to stay. It actually means what it says, correct, or it's up to us to pick and choose what is and what isn't. And trust me when I tell you this, we are inherently lazy, evil people. And if we're allowed to choose, yes, I'm going to go be persecuted like the Iraqis and Assyrians. Yes, I'm going to go out there and make a fool of myself talking about Jesus at my neighbor's house. If we have the choice, we will say, no, actually, I don't have to do that. We hired a guy to do that. Or there's an evangelism committee that does that. We're going to pick and we're going to say, yeah, Matthew 28 all the way except for me because I'm on the Flower Guild. What? No. It just doesn't work that way. And so what it comes down to is not, I don't think it's so much the fact that that we don't believe in the virgin birth or we don't believe in a resurrected Jesus, but that we actually think we have the ability in ourselves to determine what we will and will not believe is the beginning of the failure of a church.
Well, that is, and that's been the great divide, the great omission instead of the great commission. The Great Commission was to take this outside of the walls of the church and spread it. But the omission has been, we got our group. Let's not mess it up by bringing in more outsiders that are going to confuse things. That's right. So we're all getting ready to go to we're recording this before Thanksgiving. So we're getting ready to go to our meals, our family meals. And how many of you are expecting some sort of controversial discussion? Are you willing, as Doc said, to bring the truth into the room and turn it loose and see what happens? Or what are you expecting?
I'll be expecting that I'll be asked to say the blessing.
Exactly.
I will too.
Yeah.
Every year my dad says, well, Carl, why don't you do the blessing? And I say, Dad, it's Thanksgiving. It's my day off. and then everybody laughs, and then I
then you say the blessing, right? That's right. Do y'all do the what I'm thankful for thing with the little ear of corn and stuff like that?
Well, we don't have the ear of corn, but several years ago, my stepmother decided that we were going to do this, go around the table, and one person said, I'm thankful for my job, someone else said, I'm thankful for my family, I'm thankful for this, and we got to my wife, and God bless my wife, she said, I'm thankful that Jesus Christ died for my sins.
God bless her.
And then it came to me, and I said,
what she said.
No, I was so blown away by her taking that stand at a table where it wasn't going to be accepted by everybody at the table. But that was what she was thankful for. That's what mattered, and she spoke up. Yeah. And it brought the room. Way down. I mean, seriously,
sure.
Everybody was laughing, having a great time. She said that, and it was like,
yeah, right. So I'm just picturing that your Thanksgiving celebration dinners are kind of the Norman Rockwell, the scene, that we've all with the mama.
Yeah, except I got to tell you, it's great because this year
I'm talking to Doc.
This year we're having some Russian friends, so certainly the conversation will turn to Vladimir Putin. So I'll get back with you next week and let you know what they think that we should do with Putin. But right now, it is. That's exactly the way we do it.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. My wife puts on an apron. I wear a tie. We slick our hair back with pomade, and we sit around the table, and it's just
I'm not feeling that.
Herd this time, aren't you?
Right.
Are they coming?
It'd be a little larger. In our family, Thanksgiving was a massive meal.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 30s and 40s of people sitting around tables. Since we've come here, and now that our kids are here, it'll be a little bit smaller affair. But it'll be we don't do the corn thing. What's the corn thing?
I don't know that one.
You don't know that one?
no.
Oh, yeah. You have a piece of Indian corn. This goes back way back in our tradition, and you break off one of the little kernels.
Do you eat it?
No. You just put it out, and and then you say what you're thankful for. It's a tradition. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'm trying to start this all over the county, actually.
All right. So everybody has an opportunity to. Okay. So that's a lot. I mean, our family does something similar, but we actually have a slot machine, and everybody puts a quarter in it and pulls it.
That's more what.
That's more like
that. Norman Rockwell caught that really well in his
think he did. Yes.
And then the person who hits the jackpot is really thankful.
That's very thankful.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
This conversation certainly devolved, I think, one way or another.
Well, I mean, there's really nothing to say. I mean, what has his? I don't care what is happening in Canada. Frankly, I used to be a bishop up there. I used to love my churches in Canada, but it's going to be the same wherever you go, because the gospel is going to be the same wherever you go. If you're willing to carry out the mission of the gospel in spite of all the things that are coming against you, the things Jesus promised would come against us, the persecutions that we know would come, if we continue to do the work of the gospel, the church continues to prosper. If we refuse to do the work of the gospel and take up lesser work, or worse yet, no work at all, the church will decline. The article could have been written in a paragraph.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, my favorite part about the article actually is where they put traditional in quotes.
Yes.
It's like the air quotes. They had to spell that apart from what we would normally think of as Christian beliefs.
Well, I always read the comments too, and so there were some real interesting comments on that one, and of folks having different opinions about that. But those sort of, you don't think of Canadians as being too raucous, but they were in that one. Merry Christmas and Happy Thanksgiving,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas.
Are we rerunning this show that many times?
Yes, we will be. Get it in there.
Okay, all right. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. And we'll be back on our next time with More Faith Matters here on the Talk Station.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.